Save a little for Mitt. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, what's a movie tradesman doing out here? You know, they're all left-wingers out there, left of Lenin.
What you're about to hear isn't just a collection of Hollywood stories. It's a study in power, the kind that doesn't announce itself, doesn't demand attention, and yet commands the room more completely than anyone who ever tried. By the time we're done, you'll understand why one of the most feared characters in modern movie history was secretly borrowed from a man who almost never raises his voice. Meryl Streep said he was the man who intimidated other men more than anyone she had ever worked with. Hilary Swank, standing on the Oscar stage with the orchestra trying to play her off, turned around and told them to stop because she hadn't gotten to him yet. These are the Oscar winners, the celebrated directors, the household names who found themselves unexpectedly undone by Clint Eastwood's Quiet. And every single one of them went on record and said something nobody saw coming. To understand why, you have to understand how he actually works on a set. There is no shouting on a Clint Eastwood production, no megaphone, no theatrical command. The word action never leaves his mouth. In its place comes something softer, almost private, a low, easy go-ahead or all right, go ahead. Actors have described it as startling in the best possible way. You're standing on set, fully in character, and somewhere just over your shoulder you hear it, so quiet it barely registers. And then you realize the camera is already rolling. When the take ends, he doesn't bark cut, he murmurs, "That's enough of that," or simply "Stop." Every time, without fail, that same calm, unhurried delivery. No drama, no performance, just the quiet authority of a man who has never needed to raise his voice to be heard. Eastwood traced this habit back himself in a 2003 appearance on Inside the Actor's Studio. It started during his years on the CBS Western Rawhide, which ran from 1959 to 1965. Yelling on a working horse set spooked the animals, so the cast and crew learned to keep everything low and controlled. Decades passed, productions changed, budgets grew, and the habit never left him. As actor after actor has since discovered, that quiet ends up carrying more weight than any director screaming through a megaphone ever could. The man who demonstrated that to the entire British public was Tom Hanks. In November of 2016, Hanks appeared on the Graham Norton Show on BBC One, there to promote Sully, the Eastwood-directed film about Captain Chesley Sullenberger's emergency landing on the Hudson River. This is a two-time Best Actor Oscar winner, a man who has worked shoulder to shoulder with Spielberg, Zemeckis, and Ron Howard. When Norton asked him what it was like to be directed by Eastwood, Hanks dropped his voice into a flat, near-whispered impression and told the room, "You certainly don't want one of those Eastwood looks." He explained that Eastwood treats his actors the way he once treated horses on Rawhide, gently, without unnecessary noise, trusting them to deliver. And then came the line that traveled around the world. The phrase Hanks chose was simple, direct, and unmistakable, intimidating as hell. That was Tom Hanks, the most universally trusted man in American film, sitting on a British talk show couch, openly admitting that Clint Eastwood made him nervous. A different kind of impact shows up in the story of the actress, whose entire trajectory was shaped by an Eastwood film. Hilary Swank claimed Best Actress at the 77th Academy Awards on February 27, 2005. Her second Oscar for Million Dollar Baby over Annette Bening in Being Julia. Standing on that stage in front of the entire industry, she worked through her thank yous. Then the orchestra began to play. Most winners at that moment smile, wave, and walk off. Swank did something else entirely. She turned and told the orchestra to stop. She told the room she hadn't gotten to Clint yet, and she had deliberately saved him for last. Her final words from that stage were a direct thank you to Clint Eastwood for allowing her to go on the journey with him. But the most revealing thing Swank ever said about him came before any of that, in a press interview with critic Emmanuel Levy, before the film had even been released. She said that Clint had been making movies longer than she had been alive, and that the first time she sat across from him, she was struck completely speechless, which, she admitted, was pretty hard to do. Then came the confession that has followed her ever since, that Clint Eastwood was the first person who ever made her blush, that she turned, in her own words, as red as an apple. This is a woman who would go on to win her second Oscar playing a professional boxer, and the man sitting across the table from her made her flush like a schoolgirl. During a 60 Minutes profile that aired on CBS in February of 2005, Swank also revealed something she had kept hidden during production. She had developed a serious staph infection while training for the role and never told Eastwood about it. Her reasoning was straightforward. That's what happens to boxers. Eastwood's response on that same broadcast was equally direct. He called her the best there is, as good an actress as he had ever worked with. Now here's where the story takes a turn that almost nobody saw coming. The Eastwood effect reaches even the most decorated actress in American film history. And what Meryl Streep has said about him over the years rewrites the way you'll think about one of her most iconic roles. Streep and Eastwood co-starred together in The Bridges of Madison County in 1995, and she has been talking about that experience in interviews ever since. In a piece republished in Parade in July of 2025, she delivered what is arguably the single most quoted line ever spoken about Eastwood by a fellow actor. Her words were that Clint was the man she had worked with who intimidated other men the most, and the reason wasn't anything he did. It was everything he didn't do. He didn't make unnecessary gestures. His voice never rose, except once. She called him an instinctive, effortless filmmaker. And then she said something that reframes an entire chapter of cinema history. Streep has confirmed in multiple interviews that her Oscar-nominated performance as Miranda Priestley, the glacially controlled fashion editor in The Devil Wears Prada, was modeled directly on Clint Eastwood. Her exact words, a direct steal from the way she watched him run a set, someone the crew genuinely respected, who never raised his voice, and who, on the one occasion he did, left people shaken for 2 weeks. The most feared boss in modern movie comedy is built from a real man who barely speaks above a whisper. On the making of documentary included with the Bridges of Madison County DVD, Streep added one more detail. She was stunned by the fact that Eastwood refused to showcase his own emotional moments. After watching the final cut, she realized he had quietly removed the more vulnerable parts of his own performance, the moments that might have drawn attention to him. His instinct, in her words, came down to a very clear sense of exactly how much was needed to tell the story. No more, no less. Matt Damon ran straight into that instinct on Invictus, and the story he's told about it has become something of a Hollywood legend. Eastwood cast Damon in 2009 to play South African rugby captain Francois Pienaar. To prepare, Damon spent 6 months working with a dialect coach, one he described as very well known in the industry, going Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, perfecting the South African accent. 6 months of dedicated preparation, all for a role that Eastwood would film in a single take. After the first take, Damon asked for another. He felt he could go further, push harder. Eastwood shut it down immediately, quietly, without irritation, asking why they would waste everybody's time on a second take when Damon had already nailed it. Damon's response was immediate. He simply said he supposed they were moving on. The entire production of Invictus ran that way. One take per setup. Morgan Freeman, supporting cast, everyone one take. When Damon came back to work with Eastwood the following year on Hereafter, there was a single scene involving a 9-year-old non-actor that required around 40 takes. Damon described it as astonishing, not because 40 takes is unusual in Hollywood, but because on an Eastwood set, it was practically unheard of. The philosophy Damon carried away from the experience was simple. A crew will go to the ends of the earth for a director, as long as that director isn't exhausting them on every single shot. The message Eastwood delivered on Invictus was quiet, as always, but it was unmistakable. The decision had been made, and no second take was coming. That kind of pressure reveals something different in every actor. For Angelina Jolie, it revealed exactly how prepared you need to be before you ever walk through his door. Jolie came to Changeling in 2008 playing Christine Collins, the real Los Angeles mother whose son was kidnapped in 1928. She has taken on some of the most demanding roles in modern Hollywood, and her assessment of working with Eastwood, given during the film's promotional featurettes, was direct. She said you have to get your stuff together before you arrive, because he doesn't linger. He is fully prepared from the moment filming begins. He expects the same from everyone around him. And the moment you step onto his set, you feel it, that immediate pressure to bring your absolute best. Then she added a detail that is almost remarkable for a director of his standing. He won't ask you to do it 20 times. Gets quieter than that, actually. According to the Changeling production notes, Eastwood spoke so softly on set that camera operator Steve Campanelli sometimes had to relay his directions to Jolie because she simply couldn't hear them. Eastwood would occasionally ask her to play a scene quietly, almost as though it were just for him, while secretly signaling the camera operator to roll. Co-star John Malkovich, when asked to describe the directing style in a word or two, landed on something precise. He called it redefining economical. Bradley Cooper's reaction carried the same feeling, though wrapped in a kind of wide-eyed disbelief that's become one of the more memorable pieces of American sniper press. At a December 2014 press conference, Cooper's opening line was that you wake up excited every single morning on an Eastwood set, that it never gets old, that it feels like the most exciting thing. The story he chose to illustrate that came down to a Holiday Inn Express. Cooper had arrived on location expecting to find Eastwood surrounded by an entourage, the full machinery of a major Hollywood production. Instead, there was just the man himself, small backpack, no fanfare, checking in like any other guest. The following morning at 8 o'clock, the room phone rang. The voice on the other end was Eastwood, asking quietly whether Cooper was up, whether he wanted to come get some breakfast. Cooper's verdict on the whole experience came down to 4 words. It was just so crazy. Kevin Lax, the Navy SEAL who served as technical advisor on the film, told The Hollywood Reporter in January of 2015 that there is simply not a lot of fluff with Clint Eastwood. The energy of being around him, in Lax's words, pushes you to be better, and Eastwood himself is exactly what he appears to be. Cooper would go on to have his own Eastwood-style decision moment during that production, and it has since become one of the most repeated behind-the-scenes stories in recent Hollywood memory. The day they were scheduled to shoot the scene where Cooper's character holds his newborn baby, the real infant they had hired arrived on set with a fever. The backup baby never showed up at all. Eastwood handled it in his usual fashion. According to screenwriter Jason Hall, quoted in Time magazine on January 21, 2015, Eastwood turned to the prop department and delivered his solution in 5 words. "Give me the doll, kid." On the Ellen DeGeneres show in October of 2015, Cooper joked that he had tried to wiggle the doll's arm himself to save the production $100,000 in CGI costs. Co-star Sienna Miller told the same show the prop looked like something out of Alien. But the point of the story was never the prop. The point was that Eastwood made the call in 5 words, with no discussion and no debate, and the production moved on. Leonardo DiCaprio represents the moment when Eastwood's quiet style stopped being a curiosity and started to create genuine friction. The 2011 film J. Edgar paired the two of them, with DiCaprio playing FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover. Co-star Judi Dench retold what happened next at a literary festival, and the story has since been picked up by outlets around the world. Her account placed her in a scene alongside DiCaprio, the two of them chatting casually between takes, talking about everyday things, passing time, until she finally asked whether they were actually going to do the scene at some point. DiCaprio looked at her and said it was already done. Eastwood had filmed the entire scene without either of them knowing the camera was rolling. No direction, no signal, no cue, just the camera running quietly while they talked. Dench's summary was straightforward. Eastwood doesn't mess about. You start at 9 and finish at 3:30. She called it heaven. Inside that same story, though, sits a colder detail. DiCaprio reportedly asked for another take at one point, and Eastwood told him no, that the day was over. Multiple outlets have since noted that Eastwood and DiCaprio have not worked together since. Armie Hammer, who played FBI agent Clyde Tolson in the same film, added a story in promotional interviews that fills in the picture further. He and DiCaprio were struggling to stage a fight scene between Hoover and Tolson. Eastwood, then in his 80s, watched quietly for a while and then got up out of his chair. He walked over and demonstrated the fight himself alongside his longtime stunt coordinator, Buddy Van Horn. In Hammer's telling, the two of them started physically working it out right there on the floor. Then Eastwood stood up and delivered the only direction he planned to give. 4 words, okay, something like that. Going further back into Hollywood history, you arrive at Burt Reynolds, and a story that cuts to the core of who Eastwood has always been. Reynolds and Eastwood were the two dominant box office forces of the 1970s and 1980s, and they co-starred together in City Heat in 1984, on Larry King Live in 2000, and again later on Conan and Letterman. Reynolds told the story of how both men had been fired by Universal Studios in the same year, long before either of them was famous. The studio's reason for letting Eastwood go, according to Reynolds, was that his Adam's apple stuck out too far, that he talked too slowly, and that he had a chipped tooth he refused to fix. Reynolds then asked why he himself was being released, and was told simply that he couldn't act. His response to Eastwood was that Eastwood was really in trouble, because Reynolds could at least learn how to act, while that Adam's apple wasn't going anywhere. Reynolds was joking. The punchline, though, was real. Eastwood didn't change. The tooth stayed chipped. The delivery stayed slow. The voice never lifted. The industry, in the end, came to him. Not every reaction to Clint Eastwood has been admiration, and the most publicly documented confrontation of his career came from director Spike Lee. In May of 2008 at the Cannes Film Festival, Lee was there to promote his own World War II film, Miracle at St. Anna. Eastwood had recently released 2 films about the Battle of Iwo Jima, Flags of Our Fathers and Letters from Iwo Jima, both from 2006. Lee's remarks, reported by The Guardian and ABC News, were pointed. He noted that Eastwood had made 2 films about Iwo Jima totaling more than 4 hours of screen time, and that there was not a single black soldier depicted on screen. In Eastwood's version of Iwo Jima, Lee argued black soldiers simply did not exist. Eastwood's response when The Guardian put Lee's criticism to him directly on June 6, 2008, was characteristically unvarnished. His reply came in the form of a question. Had Lee ever studied the history? The film in question, Flags of Our Fathers, was built around the famous flag-raising photograph. Those men were the men in that photograph. Casting a black actor into that specific moment, in Eastwood's framing, would have had people saying he'd lost his mind, that it wasn't accurate. The line that ended up repeated everywhere was his directive that someone like Lee should simply shut his face. He also pointed out that when he made Bird a film that was 90% black, he cast 90% black actors. He wasn't, he said, about to make Nelson Mandela a white man. Lee fired back at ABC News, telling the network that Eastwood was not his father and they were not on a plantation. A comment telling someone to shut their face, in Lee's view, sounded like nothing more than an angry old man. According to Mark Elliott's 2009 biography, American Rebel, Steven Spielberg, who had produced both Iwo Jima films, eventually stepped in privately to broker a peace between them. Lee later told Collider that the whole episode had been overblown and that the matter was settled. It remains, to this day, the loudest public dispute Eastwood has ever had with a fellow filmmaker. Then came the empty chair. On Thursday, August 30th, 2012, at the Republican National Convention in Tampa, Florida, Clint Eastwood walked out as a mystery guest before an audience estimated at 30 million viewers. His formal endorsement of Mitt Romney for president had come earlier that month. What followed has been debated ever since. For roughly 12 minutes, Eastwood delivered a largely improvised speech to an empty chair, addressing it directly, as though President Barack Obama were sitting in it. The reaction arrived instantly and from every direction at once. President Obama posted a photo on Twitter that same night, the back of his own head as he sat at the cabinet table, captioned with 3 words, "This seat's taken." Bob Newhart tweeted that he'd heard Eastwood was channeling him at the convention, and that his lawyers were already drafting a lawsuit. Film critic Roger Ebert wrote that his hero was coming across as sad and pathetic, that he hadn't needed to do this to himself. Bill Maher took the opposite view. As someone who had spent 30 years doing stand-up, he argued that Eastwood had walked out without a net, without a teleprompter, and had done an extended improvised bit with nothing but an empty chair and had killed. The most memorable response of all came from Daniel Day-Lewis at the BAFTA Britannia Awards on November 7, 2012. Day-Lewis, one of the most respected actors of his generation, walked on stage carrying a chair, set it down, and addressed it directly. He told the room he loved Clint Eastwood and that this was no satirical commentary on the man or his politics. The reason he had done it, he explained, was simple. When he watched Eastwood talking to an empty chair in front of a room full of strangers, his only thought was, "I've got to try that." The Hollywood elite, the political class, the international press, the comedians, the columnists, all of them spent a week trying to make sense of what Clint Eastwood had done. Eastwood himself, in a September 2012 interview with his hometown paper, the Carmel Pine Cone, called President Obama the greatest hoax ever perpetrated on the American people. He has since acknowledged regret for the speech in an interview with the Washington Post published in August of 2016. But in the moment itself, while the convention hall went quiet, while Romney campaign aides reportedly slipped out of the room, while the empty chair meme spread across Twitter within the hour, Clint Eastwood stood at that podium and didn't flinch. One more story is worth telling, and this one is the quietest of all. The year was 2018, and country singer Toby Keith found himself at Clint Eastwood's charity golf tournament in Pebble Beach, California. Eastwood was 88 years old. Keith asked him how he kept going at that pace, kept working, kept showing up. The answer Eastwood gave, as Keith recounted to Billboard in December of that year, was that he just got up every morning and went out, and that he didn't let the old man in. Keith wrote the song that same day. Eastwood placed it in the end credits of his film The Mule, which premiered in Los Angeles on December 10, 2018. According to Keith, Eastwood called Warner Brothers personally to confirm the placement. One conversation, one song, one credit. That is the speed at which Clint Eastwood operates. Quentin Tarantino, asked about Eastwood on Bill Maher's Club Random podcast in 2024, called the Dollars trilogy the greatest achievement in the history of cinema. The only trilogy that completely and utterly worked to the verb. Why last detail? He isn't alone in that view. Morgan Freeman has described Eastwood as almost invisibly enabling, a director who genuinely likes to watch actors work, who expects you to know your craft and then takes 2 full steps back and lets you do it. And that, in the end, is the answer to the question that started all of this. Why have so many of the biggest names in Hollywood walked away from a Clint Eastwood set admitting they were rattled? He doesn't perform authority. He doesn't impose it. He doesn't yell it into a megaphone or demand it with grand gestures. He simply has it, and has had it since the days when keeping quiet on a working horse set was a practical necessity rather than a directorial philosophy. Tom Hanks called it intimidating as hell. Hilary Swank said he made her blush like no one ever had. Meryl Streep said he intimidated other men more than anyone she'd ever worked with, and did it by doing almost nothing at all. Matt Damon spent 6 months mastering an accent and learned on the first take that there would not be a second. Bradley Cooper found him alone at a Holiday Inn with a backpack. Leonardo DiCaprio asked for one more take and didn't get it. Spike Lee picked a fight and was told to shut his face. An empty chair at a political convention rattled a presidential campaign, while the man who put it there walked calmly off stage. Through all of it, from Rawhide in 1959 to The Mule in 2018, Clint Eastwood has been saying the same thing in that same quiet voice, the same words he's been delivering for more than 60 years. All right, go ahead. That's enough of that. Some people have cool energy. Clint Eastwood is the one everyone else measures theirs against.